They say silence before a wedding is sacred. A quiet room, a deep breath, the stillness before vows are spoken. But mine wasn't quiet. Not inside. I was standing in the dressing room of the chapel, surrounded by lace steam from a garment steamer, the faint scent of roses and hairspray. My sister was fussing with the hem of my dress. My best friend Emily was checking the playlist for the reception. And I was holding my phone, staring at a message that didn't belong in a moment like that. It read, "I'm sorry, Jill. I can't do this. I thought I could, but I can't lie to you or myself anymore." That was it. No call, no explanation. Just a string of text bubbles sitting like landmines on my screen. I didn't speak, didn't blink. I just kept reading it again and again, as if the words might change if I stared hard enough. They didn't. The room around me kept moving like the world hadn't just shifted under my feet. Emily asked me something about the bouquet. I think I nodded. Maybe I didn't. I don't remember. What I do remember is the chill that crept over me despite the Georgia heat. The way my throat tightened. The way my knees briefly forgot how to hold me up. My fiancé, Mark Holloway, investment banker, family man, suit and tie type, had just walked out of our wedding. Or maybe he never walked in. We had been together for 4 years, shared a mortgage, 2 dogs, and Sunday dinners at his mother's. He proposed under a lighthouse in Maine. I said yes before he finished asking, and now, hours from becoming his wife, he was gone. Not in a tragic accident, not because of some life-altering emergency. He simply changed his mind. I sat down slowly on the bench in front of the mirror, careful not to wrinkle the dress that someone somewhere still believed I'd walk down the aisle in. Emily must have noticed something in my face. She crossed the room. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I just held the phone up like it weighed more than I could carry. She took one look and gasped. "Jill." Is this a joke? I shook my head. I could hear my mother's voice through the thin chapel door. Laughter. Talking to guests. Clinking of glasses. The day was moving forward, and I was stuck in reverse. "I'll call him Emily," said already unlocking her phone. "No," I said, my voice hollow. If he wanted to talk, he would have. There was nothing left to say. The man I was supposed to marry didn't have the decency to tell me to my face. That silence, the one people say is sacred, it was now unbearable. We canceled everything quietly, efficiently. My mother told guests I wasn't feeling well. She always did know how to save face. I watched through the window as people slowly left with confused expressions and uneaten hors d'oeuvres in their hands. That night, I didn't cry. I sat in my kitchen in full makeup and a torn veil drinking orange juice straight from the carton. I stared at the wall, at the future that had evaporated in 4 sentences. The funny thing about heartbreak is how quiet it is. There's no crash, no fireworks, no applause, just silence and the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't know it then, but that silence. It would eventually make space for something else, but not yet. The next morning I opened the bookstore like I always did. Same keys. Same creaky front door. Same bell that chimed when I walked in. The only difference was me. There's a kind of numbness that's oddly productive. You stop feeling, but you keep moving. That's how I made it through the first few hours stacking a shipment of secondhand paperbacks, wiping down the espresso counter restocking bookmarks no one ever bought, but always touched. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not Emily. Not my parents. Not even myself, really. I just needed to do something normal. And my store, Dogwood Books and Brews, was the most normal thing I had. At around 10:15, a woman came in asking for travel books to Maine. That stung. but I smiled. At 11:00, a couple bought a vintage typewriter I'd priced too low out of sentimentality. At noon, I made myself a grilled cheese in the back room and stared at the back of the shop, where the wedding dress now hung behind the frosted office door, like a ghost in silk. I didn't have the heart to take it home, so I hung it up, dry cleaned, untouched, not because I had hopes, but because I couldn't bear to crumple it. I told myself it was just temporary, but deep down, I knew it was going to live there for a while. Around 2:30 he walked in, worn denim jacket, boots that looked like they'd been places, a travel mug looped through one finger, tall, older than me probably, mid-50s, silver in his hair, but not in a polished way, more like the kind that just grows that way and doesn't care to hide it. He paused at the door, like he wasn't sure whether to come in or not. Then the bell above the door decided for him. "Take your time," I said automatically, not really looking up. He gave a quick nod, then wandered toward the used fiction section in the back. I went back to entering inventory. A few minutes later, I heard the soft sound of pages turning. He came up to the counter 20 minutes later, holding a dog-eared copy of A Farewell to Arms. War and rain, he said. Always goes together, doesn't it? I looked up. His voice was low, almost gravelly, but not unkind. I offered a small smile. Depends who's doing the remembering. He looked at me a moment longer than strangers usually do. "You own this place," I nodded. "For 9 years. Started with just books. Added coffee later when the bills got higher than the poetry sales." That earned a faint smile. "Good call." He set the book down. "You mind if I pay with cash?" "No problem." He counted out exact change, no small talk. But just as he turned to leave, he paused again. "Is that a wedding dress in the office?" I stiffened. I could have lied. Could have said it belonged to someone else, that it was for a display. But the numbness had worn off just enough to make me honest. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It was supposed to be worn yesterday." His eyes didn't widen. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," or tilt his head with pity like the others had. He just nodded once. Firm, respectful. Looks like it deserved better. Then he tipped his chin slightly and walked out. The bell above the door chimed again. And just like that, he was gone. I stood behind the counter, hand still on the register, heart racing for the first time in 2 days. Not because I felt something romantic. God, no. Not yet. It was because someone had seen the whole picture and didn't flinch. That night, I locked up early. Sat in the back room with a cup of decaf I didn't finish, staring at the dress behind the glass. I didn't cry. Still couldn't. But for the first time, I didn't feel quite so invisible. The next morning, I came in early and hung a small sign on the door, "Quiet stories told here." And I meant it for the books, for the customers. And maybe if I was lucky, for me too. 3 days passed. I didn't expect to see him again. The man with the old boots and Hemingway book. But on Thursday, a little before noon, the bell above the door chimed again, and there he was. Same jacket, different mug. He gave me a polite nod like we were just acquaintances in an elevator. No small talk. Just moved straight to the corner table near the window, picked up a book from the shelf, the things they carried, and sat. He read for a while. 40 minutes, maybe more. Didn't order anything. Didn't fidget. Just sat with that kind of stillness that most people forgot how to carry. Eventually I made 2 cups of tea and walked over, set one down on the table in front of him. He looked up a bit surprised. "It's chamomile," I said. "No caffeine." Thought you might appreciate the quiet kind. His lips curved slightly. You always give out free tea to strangers. No, I said. But you came back. That makes you almost a regular. He glanced around, then back at me. Place has a pulse. Most shops like this feel like they're holding their breath. That was a compliment, I think. I pulled out the opposite chair, not asking permission, just testing his comfort. He didn't stop me. I sat. Mac, he said after a moment. Name's Mac, Jill, I replied. We shook hands. His were warm, strong. A scar ran across the back of his right one, faded but deep. We didn't talk much that first real conversation. Not in the way people usually fill space. We talked in questions and pauses, books and tea, a little about weather. I asked what he did for work. He paused, then said, used to be logistics, retired early. Now I mostly fix things. I didn't press. He asked how long I'd run the store. 9 years, I said. Bought it from the previous owner when she got tired of paying rent and arguing about banned books. He smirked. Sounds noble. Sounds stubborn, I corrected. Same thing most days. Mac nodded like he knew exactly what I meant. A few customers wandered in and out. We stayed at the table. Quiet. Not awkward. Just quiet. After a while he stood. Thanks for the tea. I nodded. Thanks for drinking it. He tapped the book he'd been reading, returned it to the shelf with care. Not everyone does that. I'll bring a book next time, he said on the way out. The bell above the door sang again. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the door clicked shut. It wasn't that he was interesting, though he was. It was that he didn't ask for anything. Not a discount. Not my story. Not a performance. He just showed up, sat still, and saw things. That night, I brewed a pot of chamomile just for myself, drank it on the back steps behind the shop, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like books and cinnamon. I didn't feel healed, but I felt noticed. And when you've been invisible in your own life long enough, that's a start. Saturday morning started like most others. Slow coffee front window sun, the faint hum of jazz on the speakers. I was halfway through organizing a shipment of local poetry books when the mail came in. Among the bills and catalogs was a cream-colored envelope, heavier stock, hand-addressed. I knew what it was before I opened it. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the card, thick, embossed with gold foil on the border. The city of Augusta cordially invites you to the grand opening of the Eastside Public Library, Sunday, 6:00 p.m. In recognition of your generous contribution and continued support, we are honored to acknowledge you and your fiancé during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I stared at the words, you and your fiancé. It wasn't a mistake. I had donated to the library months ago when Mark and I were still planning a life together Sunday brunches, a golden retriever and joint community work. His firm had written half the check, but the honor was being given to me. The problem was, in the city's eyes, I was still the future Mrs. Holloway. They didn't know he had texted himself out of my life. I held the card like it might burn through my fingers, sat at the counter, read it again. Emily walked in 10 minutes later, balancing 2 coffees and a muffin bag between her arms. You won't believe the line at Brood Awakenings, she started. What's that look? I handed her the card. She scanned it, then looked at me. Oh, yeah. When is it? Tomorrow night? She sat across from me, placed the coffee between us. Do they know about... You know, I shook my head. They think we're still a power couple, who donates to libraries and eats shrimp cocktail at fundraisers. Technically, you are a power half couple, she said gently, trying to lighten it. It didn't help. I leaned back. I can't go. I can't stand up in front of that crowd, with people whispering, wondering why I'm alone. My name is printed in the damn program next to his. Emily was quiet for a moment, then reached into her purse, pulled out a pen. What if you weren't alone? I raised an eyebrow. You offering no. I mean, Mac. My breath caught. He's already been to your shop twice. He doesn't ask questions. He's clearly not trying to flirt his way into free coffee. Maybe he'd be open to helping out. Just this once. That's ridiculous. So was being left at the altar via text. But here we are. I exhaled long and low. It was a terrible idea. But so was showing up to a public event, as the abandoned woman everyone felt sorry for. I could already hear the comments. The two soft voices. The "oh, that's such a shame." I hated pity more than heartbreak. I picked up my phone, stared at it for a long time, then typed, "Hey, this is Jill from the bookstore. I got a weird favor to ask. Feel free to say no." I hit send before I could think better of it. A full hour passed. Then my phone buzzed. Mac's reply was short, "I'm listening." Mac showed up 15 minutes before closing, just like I knew he would. He stepped in quietly, gave a small nod like always, and walked to his usual corner table. He hadn't brought a book this time. That told me he was taking this seriously. I made a pot of tea. Same blend as before. Carried 2 cups over and sat across from him without a word. He waited. I took a breath. "There's an event tomorrow night," I said. "The city's opening a new public library. I'm being recognized for helping fund it." He didn't speak, just raised his eyebrows slightly. "They're expecting me to show up. With someone. My fiancé." I said the word like it didn't belong to me anymore. Only he's not around. Not anymore. Still nothing from him. So I pushed through. I can't show up alone. Not after everything. It's a formal event. Donors, city officials, local press. If I walk in without Mark, I become the story. Mac tilted his head. "And what exactly are you asking me to do?" Pretend, I said, voice low. "Just for the evening. Be the man people think I'm supposed to be with. Smile politely. Say nothing unnecessary. Leave when it's over." He leaned back in his chair. Thoughtful, not shocked. "You want me to be your fake partner? Temporary," I added quickly. "Just a placeholder. I need to get through it without turning into someone's dinner table gossip." He looked down at the steam rising from his cup, then back at me. "You sure about this?" "No," I admitted, "but I'd rather gamble on your silence than their stares." Max studied me for a moment longer. Then he gave the faintest shrug. "What do I need to wear?" I blinked. "You're saying yes." "You asked." "I'm saying yes." No hesitation. No lecture. Just a quiet agreement. Like I'd asked him to help move a couch instead of impersonate my fiancé in front of half the town. He finished his tea. Set the cup down. "I'll need a suit." "I have one," I said. "Mark left it at my place." "Fitting," Max said almost under his breath. He stood, looked me in the eye. "I'll show up. I won't embarrass you. But I'm not good at small talk." "Perfect," I said. "I'm not good at explaining." As he left, he paused at the door. "You sure this helps you?" I didn't answer right away, but eventually I nodded. "It helps me stay upright." And that was enough. The East Side Library opening was held in the kind of building that looked like it had been important once. Now it was new again, fresh paint, soft lighting, hanging banners that said things like, "Knowledge for the next generation." I hadn't worn the white dress, of course. just a navy blue wrap dress with sleeves that felt too tight at the shoulders. Emily had come by to curl my hair, offered to come along, but I said no. This part I needed to do myself, or rather with Mac. He arrived exactly on time, in Mark's old gray suit. No tie. Shirt slightly open at the collar. Somehow he didn't look like a man borrowing someone else's life. He looked grounded. "You clean up well," I said when he stepped into my car. He smirked. "Don't get used to it. We didn't talk much on the way. Just the soft sound of traffic and a few directions. But something about having him beside me, calm, unbothered, held my nerves together like thread. When we walked into the event, the first wave of attention washed over us. People turned, smiled, nods of approval, warm greetings. A few double takes mostly at Max, who didn't quite match the banker profile they remembered, but no one questioned it. They saw a couple, polished, present. Mac was a natural in the most unexpected way. He didn't overdo anything, just stood beside me, offered the occasional hand at my lower back when I moved through crowds. When someone made a joke about married life, he gave a dry smile and let me do the talking. He never once said the wrong thing. Mostly he didn't say much at all. The mayor gave a speech. The ribbon was cut. I was handed a microphone I didn't want. Thanked politely. Said something generic about community and growth and second chances. People clapped. Cameras flashed. For a moment, I felt like I was playing a version of myself I hadn't quite rehearsed. Then I saw him, Greg, standing near the back of the crowd. Same gray suit as always. Tie a little tighter than necessary. And beside him, a blonde woman in a green dress clinging to his arm, with the ease of someone who thought she belonged there. I felt the heat rise in my chest before I could control it. My fingers clenched the edge of the podium just a second too long. Mac noticed. He leaned in close enough for only me to hear. "You need air." I shook my head. "You need an exit." Still no. He nodded once subtle. We stepped down from the podium, moved through the crowd. Greg's eyes found mine. I didn't break stride. He stepped toward us. "Jill," he said, voice tight. "You look surprised." "I'm not," I replied evenly. "Just busy." His gaze flicked to Mac. "You must be." Her husband Mac answered without blinking, then extended a hand. Greg didn't take it. I didn't care. "We're happy for you," I added, glancing at the woman on his arm. "Really?" Mac gently tugged me forward. We moved on before Greg could reply. We stood near the back wall for a moment, just breathing. "Did that help you?" Mac asked softly. I didn't answer right away. Then he didn't expect me to land on my feet. Mac tilted his head. "You didn't. You built new ones." I looked at him, really looked. For a man I barely knew, he had an uncanny ability to see through people like glass. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For being better at this than you let on." He shrugged. "Not my first rodeo." Later, when the crowd began to thin and the music turned softer, I stood with a glass of sparkling cider in my hand, watching Mac speak briefly with a volunteer. He was kind to her, direct. He asked her name, and actually remembered it when he said goodbye. He made eye contact, listened, gave nothing away. I realized then that I had no idea who he really was, but I also realized I wasn't scared of that. We didn't kiss, didn't linger. He walked me back to my car, opened the door, nodded once. "You did good tonight," he said. "So did you." He started to turn, then paused. "Was it enough?" he asked. "Did it help?" I looked out at the building, at the lights, at Greg's car already gone. "It helped," I said. but not in the way I expected. He smiled barely, then he walked off into the night. After the library event, Mac didn't disappear. He didn't linger either. He came by the bookstore twice that week. Once with a bag of roasted peanuts he left on the counter without a word. Another time to fix the squeaky back door that had annoyed me for months. I never asked him to do it. He just did. There was no big conversation about what we'd done, no follow-up talk about pretending to be a couple. It was as if we'd both quietly agreed to tuck that night into a drawer and move on. But I started noticing things. Little things. Like how he always stood with his back to the wall eyes facing the entrance. How his posture was perfectly straight, even when slouching looked more comfortable. How he scanned a room not with paranoia, but precision. He used phrases like Roger, that, or stand down in casual conversation, as if those words were second nature. Not joking, not ironic, just natural. One morning a stack of books toppled from a high shelf. It wasn't loud, but sudden. I flinched. Mac didn't. He turned his head, registered the sound, and moved quick, controlled. Hand on my arm before I realized I'd even startled. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, but my mind didn't. I started wondering. He said he used to work in logistics, retired early, fixed things, but he never said what kind of logistics. Never mentioned a company. Never talked about friends, co-workers, past projects. He never carried a smartphone. Just a simple flip phone scuffed and taped at the hinge. Said he didn't like being tracked. Said it in a way that felt more like policy than paranoia. One afternoon, I caught him outside helping an older customer carry boxes to her car. He moved with that same quiet strength. Like he was conserving energy for something more important. Like he'd been trained not to waste motion. I asked him once, half joking, if he had a military background. He looked at me for a beat too long. Used to wear a uniform, he said, then changed the subject. Not ex-military. Not I served. Just used to wear a uniform. The phrasing stuck with me. I didn't push. But that night I Googled his name. Nothing. No LinkedIn. No public records. Not even a high school yearbook. It wasn't that he didn't exist. It was that he existed very carefully. The next day, he came by the shop with a new door hinge and a socket wrench. Fixed the front bell while I brewed tea. When he finished, he wiped his hands on a cloth, then paused. "Something on your mind?" he asked. I shook my head too quickly. "No, just tired." He nodded, didn't question it. But I caught him watching me a moment longer than usual before heading out. And when the door closed behind him, I sat down at the counter and whispered the one thought I hadn't let myself say out loud. "Who are you?" Mac. It happened on a Tuesday. A storm had rolled through the night before knocking out power across half the neighborhood. My shop stayed dark most of the day, so I closed early and took a drive aimless at first, then instinctive. I found myself pulling up next to Mac's RV, parked on the edge of an abandoned lot near the old train station. He said he liked the quiet there, said it reminded him of places that didn't expect too much from anyone. His truck was gone, but the RV door was slightly ajar. I shouldn't have entered. I know that now. But the wind had picked up, and the door creaked open just wide enough for worry to outweigh manners. "Mac," I called, softly tapping the frame. No answer. I stepped in. The space was cleaner than I expected. No clutter. A cot made with military precision. Books stacked by size. A coffee mug with a single chip on the rim. A tiny electric stove, spotless. And then in the back closet, half open, I saw it. A garment bag. Canvas. Faded. I stood there staring at it for longer than I meant to. My fingers moved before my brain did. I unzipped it halfway. Inside, neatly pressed and sealed in dry, cleaner plastic, was a military dress uniform. Deep green. Buttons shined. Insignia intact. And on the shoulder patch, a silver eagle. Colonel. I exhaled sharply like I'd been holding my breath since the day we met. The door creaked behind me. I turned. Mac stood at the steps. Rain misted on his jacket, a grocery bag in one hand. He didn't look surprised to see me. Just tired. I was checking the door, I said weakly. It was open, and you went through my things. I swallowed. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did. There was no anger in his voice. Just a kind of resignation. Like he'd expected this moment to come. I needed to know, I said, stepping back. You've been showing up, helping me, standing next to me while I pretend my life is fine, and I don't even know who you are. He set the groceries down slowly, closed the door behind him. I told you I used to wear a uniform, he said. You didn't say you were a colonel. He nodded once. I didn't. Silence filled the narrow space. The hum of the fridge, the tap of rain on the roof. What did you do? I asked finally. What kind of work? Different things. Most of them I can't talk about. Some I don't want to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. I felt heat rise in my chest. Not rage, frustration, fear. I let you into my life. I asked you for something vulnerable and real. You've been standing next to me like some steady lighthouse in all this time. You've been hiding. His jaw tightened. But he didn't look away. I wasn't hiding, he said quietly. I was just done with being watched. We stood there, two people surrounded by metal and rain, saying almost everything and almost nothing. Finally, I broke the silence. Why didn't you tell me? Because I liked not being asked about it. I liked being the guy who fixed door hinges and drank tea in silence. I liked not being handled. Handled like glass. Like something fragile or complicated or important. I've had enough of that. I looked at him, then not the man in the uniform. Not the mystery, but just him. Tired eyes. Steady voice. Calloused hands that had somehow found a place in my world without asking for space. I don't care what medals you earned, I said, but I care about what you choose to hide. He nodded. Fair enough. I left without saying goodbye, and as I got in my car, the rain starting to fall harder, I knew something had shifted, not just between us, but inside me. I wasn't angry that he had a past. I was scared because I didn't know where I fit in it. He didn't come by the shop the next day, or the day after that. By the third morning, I told myself I didn't care, that he had his life, I had mine. But when I stocked the travel shelf and saw a copy of Winds of War, my hand paused. That afternoon, I left a note under a rock outside his RV. If you're still the man who fixes hinges and drinks chamomile, I'll be at the park bench by the old train crossing. 6:00. If not, I'll stop asking. I didn't expect him to show up. But at 6:04, I heard the quiet crunch of boots on gravel. He sat beside me. No hello, just silence. And then finally he spoke. I wasn't a colonel. I turned to look at him. I was promoted twice after that. Last rank was brigadier general. The words didn't land immediately. They hovered like a slow-moving storm. I left before they pinned the second star, he added. I said nothing. He kept his gaze forward. I ran logistics and operations for over 40 teams. Oversaw missions in places I wasn't allowed to admit existed. I testified in hearings behind closed doors. I had a clearance level that made my mother's birthday classified. Why walk away? I asked barely above a whisper, because I got tired of saluting people I didn't respect, and because the uniform stopped fitting inside, I swallowed. So you just vanished into small-town Georgia and became the man who fixes doors. He finally looked at me. No, I became the man who didn't need to lie about being okay. Those words landed harder than any military title. I turned slightly away. Do you know what that feels like? Standing next to someone for weeks, trusting them with your mess, only to realize they were carrying a whole damn warehouse of their own, and never said a word. Yes, he said, because I've done it too. We sat in silence, the wind nudging the edge of the maples overhead. I'm not mad you used to be someone, I said. I'm mad you let me think you were no one. He nodded slow. I get that. I invited you into a lie because I was desperate. But then, I started letting you into my real life. And you stayed silent. I didn't stay silent, he said. I stayed still. There was a long beat before either of us breathed deep again. Do you regret leaving the army? I asked. He shook his head. I regret the parts of me that never came back. I closed my eyes. So, what now? I won't pretend anymore, he said. But I also won't ask you to forgive me. I nodded. It wasn't closure. Not yet. But it was truth. And in that moment, it was the most honest thing either of us had said in weeks. That night, I stayed late at the bookstore. I didn't restock shelves or count the register. I just sat in the back room, lights off dress shoes still on, staring at the tea mug Mac had left behind last week. It still had the faint ring of chamomile at the bottom. I had asked him to lie for me, to play a role, to shield me from the stares and the whispers I didn't want to hear. And he did, without question. But the part I hadn't admitted, not even to myself, was that I hadn't stopped pretending either, not when I asked him for help. Not when I served tea like it meant something. Not when I let him sit across from me in the quiet and gave him space I never gave anyone else. I told myself I was just rebuilding, that I was starting over. But I had never let go of the story I thought I was supposed to live, the one with the fiancé, the white dress, the perfect timing. Mac hadn't been the only one withholding truth. I had let him see me, yes, but only the version of me still trying to prove I hadn't been ruined. I was performing survival. And now that the curtain had dropped, the room felt emptier than before he ever walked in. The next day, he came by early, before the store opened. He didn't step inside, just stood at the threshold like he wasn't sure if he still belonged. I met him at the door. I'm leaving town for a while, he said simply. I nodded. Where to? Up north. Fixing up a cabin for a friend. He needs hands more than stories. I wanted to ask when he'd be back, but the question felt selfish. So instead I said, Do you still carry your uniform? He shook his head, left it folded, behind the closet door. Thought I might not need it anymore. A beat passed. I wasn't fair to you, I said. I asked you to help me lie, then got angry you weren't telling the truth. Mac gave a soft exhale. You were surviving. So was I. We stood there on the edge of something we'd both undone. Then he said, Thank you for the quiet. That one line punched harder than any goodbye. He turned hands in his jacket pockets, boots brushing gravel as he walked off. And just like that, the man who once stood beside me like granite was gone. That night, I went home. I opened the closet, took the wedding dress out of its garment bag. Not to wear it, not to mourn it, just to finally admit it was never meant for the life I'd built after. I folded it neatly, slid it into a box, labeled it simply, Then, because whatever came next needed room. But when I turned out the light, the emptiness hit harder than I expected. It wasn't about losing Mac. It was about finally standing alone, not performing, not pretending and realizing how terrifying that really is. Falling in love is scary. Falling out of illusion is worse. The days after he left were strangely full. The shop needed restocking. The new poetry club wanted space on Thursday nights. Emily dragged me out for a pottery class and pretended she didn't notice when I only made lopsided bowls. Life was moving. The world wasn't pausing just because I didn't know how to feel. But Mac's absence lingered in the corners. Not loud, just present. It found me in the small things, like when I reached for a second mug out of habit, or when I put on the kettle and realized I hadn't bought chamomile since he left. And most of all, it came in the stillness. Mac had a way of sitting in a room like he was part of the furniture, but more alive. He didn't interrupt silence. He gave it shape. That's what I missed the most. The lack of pressure to be on to perform healing or success or any version of stability. I started remembering him in flashes. Not grand gestures, just the dailies. Like the night the power went out, and we lit 3 mismatched candles, and sat cross-legged on the bookstore floor, passing a book back and forth, reading paragraphs out loud, until one of us laughed. Or the morning I burned eggs, and cursed under my breath, and he walked in, took the pan, and made scrambled eggs, with this quiet efficiency, like it was muscle memory. He never said, "Let me help." He just helped. One Sunday, we watched it rain for hours from the back steps. Didn't talk much. He whittled a piece of wood into something that looked vaguely like a bird. I sipped coffee and let my foot rest against his without thinking about it. We never kissed, never defined what we were. But in those small, unscripted hours, I had felt more understood than I ever did in the 4 years I spent planning a wedding with a man who thought presence meant being seen in a suit. Mac saw me in the gaps, the cracks, the parts I didn't curate, and I saw him there too. I remember once asking why he liked tea over coffee. He said, "Because tea forgives you when it goes cold." I hadn't understood it then, but now, sitting alone with the old mug he left behind, I did. He didn't give me intensity. He gave me real, not a grand romance, not fireworks, just 2 people quietly holding space for each other, until we didn't. One night, I found the book he left behind, A Farewell to Arms. Tucked between the pages was a receipt from my store. On the back, scribbled in his handwriting, were 6 words. No medals for surviving the silence. I stared at that line for a long time, and then I whispered to the empty room, "You were wrong, Mac, because maybe there were no medals, but what we had, what we almost were, was the first thing that ever made the silence feel like home." It was a Tuesday again, 2 weeks since he'd gone when the call came. I was in the back of the store, sorting a box of used children's books when the shop phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Dogwood books. "This is Claire." "Hi, Ms. Elliott. This is Marcia Trammell from the East Side Library Board." Her voice was crisp, professional, the kind that usually came with news wrapped in obligations. I just wanted to confirm the forwarding address for the donor acknowledgement letter. I blinked. "I'm sorry. For the secondary sponsor contribution. We received an anonymous donation last week, a substantial one, and the check was signed J. McConnell. We assumed it was connected to your original patronage." My breath caught. "He listed my name," I asked. "He listed your project," she said. requested it be categorized under in honor of community repair. Unusual phrasing, but quite moving. I barely made it through the rest of the call. My heart thudded in this slow, confused rhythm that felt like grief waking up beside surprise. Mac hadn't just vanished. He'd left a fingerprint. By the next morning, I was behind the wheel, driving north on a tip Emily had pulled from a friend who ran supply logistics for local veteran projects. Apparently, a man named McConnell had been volunteering part-time at a reclaimed timber yard that doubled as a workshop for disabled vets. No photo, no bio, just a name scribbled on a clipboard and the quiet efficiency of someone who fixed things without asking for thanks. The yard was tucked off a rural road, marked only by a mailbox with peeling paint. Inside, I found rows of stacked pine boards, the scent of fresh sawdust, and the buzz of power tools behind a corrugated metal wall. I didn't see him at first, but I felt him. Mac was in the back, sanding the edge of a handmade bench. Wore the same jacket, sleeves rolled, sawdust in his hair. He looked up, and something shifted in his eyes. He didn't smile, didn't flinch, just acknowledged me. "You tracked me," he said, setting down the sander. "You left a trail." He nodded like he'd expected I might follow it. "Wasn't sure you'd care to." I wasn't sure either, I admitted. We stood in silence for a beat. Then I asked, why the donation? He didn't answer right away, just wiped his hands on a rag and motioned for me to follow him toward a small shed in the back, quieter than the main workspace. Inside tools hung from every wall. A half-built rocking chair sat in the center, and on a nail near the window, hanging like it had been placed there without ceremony, was a silver medallion, a distinguished service cross. I knew enough to recognize it. Rare. High honor. Second only to the Medal of Honor. My throat tightened. "You said you walked away," I whispered. "I did," he said. "But parts of it follow you, even when you're barefoot." I turned to him. "And the money." He looked out the window. "Because that library mattered to you. Because your name deserved to be printed beside something that stood tall, even if you weren't wearing a white dress." I felt something sharp and soft twist inside me. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "But I wanted to. Quietly. No performance." I stared at the medallion again. "You said there were no medals for surviving the silence." He nodded slowly. Turns out I was wrong. He turned back to the bench, picked up the sandpaper again. Not dismissive, just patient, as if to say, "If you want to stay, I'll make space." But this time, I didn't move. I stood there a moment longer, letting the truth of who he was, and who he chose to be, now settle into the silence between us. And for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like falling, it felt like landing. I didn't leave the workshop that day, not right away. Mac didn't ask me to stay, but he didn't walk away either. He kept sanding the edge of the bench, slow, careful strokes, as if the wood would crack if he rushed. I stood there, arms crossed, back against the frame of the doorway. "You always fix things when you don't want to talk?" I asked. He paused, glanced up. "Not when I don't want to talk," he said. "When I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing." I stepped further in. The scent of pine and dust felt oddly grounding. "So let's say the wrong things, Mac." He didn't smile, but the corners of his mouth moved just barely. I sat on a stool opposite him. "I've been trying to figure out what all of this meant," I said. "You helping me. The tea. The library. All of it. and I keep circling back to the same question. He looked up. Why me? I asked. Why did you say yes to pretending? Why stay longer than necessary? He set the sandpaper down, wiped his hands. Didn't avoid my eyes this time. Because you didn't look at me like a story, he said. You looked at me like a man who still had use. That's rare. I swallowed throat tight. I asked you to lie for me. I lied for myself too. We sat in that truth a moment. It didn't sting. It just settled. He added, when you walked into the RV that day and found the uniform, I was angry, but not because you snooped. I was angry because I knew that the moment you saw it, we'd lose the thing we had. What thing? I asked. The quiet, he said simply. The freedom to not be who we used to be. I looked down at the floor. My fingers tugged at the hem of my sleeve. You know, I said I used to think love was built on big things. Proposals, weddings, plans. But maybe it's built on mugs left behind. On someone remembering how you take your tea. He said nothing, but I could feel him listening. I was trying so hard to outrun being abandoned, I said, that I never stopped to realize I was building a new version of myself. And I wasn't doing it alone. Mac stood, crossed to the wall, and picked something off a shelf, a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. I opened it slowly. It was the receipt from my bookstore. On the back, beneath his old handwriting, he'd written something new. It wasn't pretending. Not all of it. I read it twice, then looked up at him. Is this the part where we fix things? I asked. Mac shook his head gently. No. This is the part where we stop breaking them. A gust of wind rattled the shed door, but the silence between us didn't break. I stepped closer. This isn't going to be easy, I said. Nothing worth building ever is. And then finally, after all the half-truths and careful pauses, he reached for my hand. Not like a question, but like a quiet promise. A week later, the bench Mac had been working on showed up in the bookstore. No note, no announcement, just their solid oak, smooth edges placed in the reading nook by the front window. Like it had always belonged there. Customers noticed, complimented it. Some sat and flipped through books they had no intention of buying, but no one asked where it came from. Only I knew the hours poured into that wood, the hands behind each groove. That same afternoon, Mac stopped by. He didn't stay long, just leaned against the counter while I rang up a woman, buying a gardening memoir, and 3 chocolate bars she pretended were gifts. When the shop emptied out, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small, soft pouch. He handed it to me without a word. Inside was the silver medallion, not the Distinguished Service Cross that still hung in the workshop untouched. This one was smaller, thinner, worn. On one side was the faint outline of 2 clasped hands, engraved so subtly it almost disappeared under the light. On the other, 4 words barely legible, just you and me. I looked up confused. My father gave it to my mother, Mac said, right before he shipped out. She gave it back to him before his 2nd deployment. He carried it in his boot until the day he died. He paused. I kept it. Didn't know what to do with it for years. Thought maybe I'd bury it with my uniform when the time came. I held the cool weight of it in my palm. Why now? He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, because this is the first time it doesn't feel like it belongs to the past. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I reached into the drawer below the counter, pulled out a thin silver chain, one I'd kept from my old jewelry box but hadn't worn in years. With slow fingers, I threaded the medallion through and clasped it around my neck. It settled just below my collarbone, soft, steady present. Mac watched me, his gaze unreadable. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm not wearing it for memory," I said. "I'm wearing it to mark the starting line." We stood in silence like we had so many times before. Only this time, it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. Like forgiveness didn't need to be said out loud to be given. Like healing wasn't always about fixing what broke, but honoring what grew from the cracks. Before he left, he turned back one last time. "You know," he said, "that medallion's been to 3 continents, 4 wars, and 1 funeral." I smiled. "Well," I said, touching the charm at my chest, "I think it's ready for a bookstore." Mac gave that small, rare nod of his, then walked out, not with the weight of retreat, but with the ease of return. The new wing of the East Side Library opened on a bright, windless morning in October. Sunlight stretched clean across the sidewalk, touching the fresh glass windows and newly planted trees, like some quiet blessing. They'd added a second reading room, a community archive, and a corner dedicated to local donors. Someone had carved the quote above the entrance: "What you build with others stays standing longer." This time, I wasn't wearing navy or trying to disappear in a crowd. I wore a soft gray dress flats and the silver medallion that sat just above my heart. The place buzzed with small talk and city staff and people holding clipboards with polite urgency. They greeted me with warm smiles and words like pillar of the community and visionary. I didn't feel like either, but I stood there anyway, taller than before. The program started with a few speeches, the usual thanks the mayor's rehearsed lines about education and future generations. Then came the donor recognition. I was called forward. Claire Elliott, the MC, said, whose early vision and continued generosity helped make this expansion possible, and her smile widened in honor of an anonymous donation listed simply as "just you and me." I paused mid-step. Mac hadn't signed his name. He'd signed ours. I reached the podium, adjusted the mic, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't rehearse a thing. I used to think libraries were just about books, I said. Now I think they're about quiet, about what we fill it with and who we let join us there. Somewhere in the back I saw him, not hiding, not waiting outside, just standing among the others, hands in his pockets, jacket clean, present. We locked eyes only briefly, but it was enough. No signals, no coded looks, just knowing. I stepped down. The applause was polite brief. I was grateful for that. It left room for the moment to breathe. Mac didn't come toward me right away. He let the crowd thin, let the kids race into the children's section, and the city council members pat themselves on the back for a job well aligned with election season. Eventually, I found him near the wall of donor plaques. He looked at the names, the fonts, the spacing. "Design's not bad," he said. "Lettering's crooked," I replied. He smirked. "Glad we agree." We stood there a while. Then I asked, "Do you want to walk?" He nodded once. We didn't go far, just circled the block. The air smelled like mulch and new paint. "I didn't expect you to come," I said. "You wore the medallion," he replied. I touched it lightly. "I didn't wear it for luck," I said. "I wore it because I finally knew what it meant." Mac looked over. "And what's that?" "That I don't need a role anymore," I said. "Not a bride, not a victim, not even a symbol of second chances. Just someone who stayed." We stopped walking. The library glowed behind us, steady-built finished. "We're not going to end up in wedding photos," I said, smiling softly. "No," Mac said, but maybe we'll end up in the same chapter. That was enough. More than enough. And for the first time, we didn't need to explain it to anyone. That night, we didn't celebrate. We didn't toast with champagne or dress up or take pictures. We just sat on the back steps of the bookstore, 2 chipped mugs between us, the scent of chamomile rising like a memory we'd chosen to keep. The streets were quiet. Autumn had finally turned sharp enough to sting the skin, but not enough to send us inside. Mac handed me my mug, sat down beside me. Close, but not too close. Big day, he said. Small one, really, I replied. Depends what you count. We drank in silence for a while. The bookstore lights behind us glowed warm against the dark. Then he reached into his coat pocket again. I recognized the pouch. Same soft fabric. Same quiet hands. But this time inside weren't medals. There were 2 simple silver rings. They weren't polished. One had a scratch near the inside edge. The other had a tiny dent like it had been dropped once and never fixed. I looked up, not shocked, just still. I made them years ago, he said. Didn't know what for at the time. Just needed something to do with my hands. I ran my finger along the edge of one. It was slightly warm from his pocket. They're not for marrying again, Max said. Not for ceremony. Not for show. I nodded. I figured. They're just for holding on. To what's real. I took the smaller one, held it to the light. No engraving. No date. Just metal and memory and something that had survived the fire. Slowly, without asking, I slid it onto my finger. Not the ring finger. Just the hand that reached for truth. Mac didn't look at me while I did it. He just sipped his tea. After a long pause, I asked, "Why not flowers?" He smiled faintly. "Because they die." I laughed. Soft, real. Then took his hand, the one still rough from work and older than it used to be. We didn't say vows. We didn't rehearse anything. But there in the quiet glow of the shop that knew both our scars, we made a different kind of promise. One not written on paper. One not notarized or witnessed. A promise to stay present. To tell the truth. To drink tea even when it goes cold. And to never ever wear the uniform of someone we're not again. The wind picked up. He shifted closer. And for once, I didn't brace myself. I let it all in. No bouquet. No aisle. No applause. Just him. Just me. And one silver ring that didn't mean forever. It just meant finally.